Last fall, we sat down with 8 Black undergraduates, some liberal, some progressive, other conservative, to discuss their feelings about the upcoming 2020 presidential election. Now, with the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden tomorrow, we've reconvened these 8 students to get their new perspectives. So we actually have 7 students because Sam couldn't join us, but for the 7 students who could join us, can you go around and introduce yourselves?
Hey everyone, my name is Bobby. Hometown. Well, I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, but I don't know if I like to say that that's my hometown. Political identity, liberal, democratic. Yeah.
Hey everybody, I'm Brooks. I'm a registered independent and my hometown is Annapolis, Maryland.
Hi everyone, my name is Javon. My hometown is Fairfax, Virginia, and I identify as a conservative.
Hi, my name's Niall. I'm from Bowie, Maryland in DMV, and I'd say that I am a progressive Democrat.
Hi everyone, my name is Fatu. I'm originally my family's originally from the Gambia, but I'm from East Orange, New Jersey, born and raised. And I would say my political identity, I guess you could just say a very, very, very far left Democrat, but I'm not really a fan of the two-party system. So there's that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joey. I'm from Frederick, Maryland. I have to agree with Fatu, very far left Democrat. I'm registered as a Democrat, even though I don't really like going by that term.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa. My hometown is Baltimore, Maryland, and I am a progressive.
Well, thank y'all for introducing yourselves again. So I don't know if y'all remember, but the last time we convened, I asked y'all to use 3 words to describe how you feel or how you felt about the state of the country. And so I want to open by posing the question to you again. And whoever wants to start, feel free.
I guess I can jump in. Skeptical, but optimistic.
I'll go next. Still fed up.
I would say concerned, but optimistic.
Kind of, sort of optimistic.
For me, I think given the, for lack of a better word, shit show that my party has gone through for the past couple of months, I would, why everyone is a little bit more optimistic, I would say devastated and shocked, to be quite frank with you.
I would say unsure for future.
Into the fire.
Well, Javon, I know you said that everyone feels probably a bit more optimistic than you, but that didn't sound very, very optimistic to me. Last time, Fatu, I know you were pissed the hell off, so I think still fed up is a little bit better than pissed the hell off. But so last time we also discussed political polarization and how many of your political identities extend beyond the two-party system and the policies that they support. So I just wanted to know, since our last conversation, have any of you shifted your political attitudes in opposition or in favor of your party?
I feel like supporting the Democrats is just a roller coaster in and of itself, even though I would imagine the other side of the aisle is doing much better. I stand where, I feel a little worse. I'm worried because I think that initially the concern was just not having Trump in office. And I think there was some alignment in that. And I feel like now that we're in the aftermath of it, there's a lot of hesitation in policy and we aren't really sure where we're standing. And we have this majority, but now are we sure people are going to want to actually use it? It's like really weird kind of space where I see the opportunity of my party, but I don't necessarily see the follow through. So I would actually say I'm leaning a little bit away from my party more than I did previously, but just because we're not caught in what I viewed as like a political life or death struggle. So taking a step back from that, I can go back to being dissatisfied.
Yeah, I would just follow up. I think I'm definitely, like I said, devastated and shocked at the actions that took place on January 6th. I was actually one of the few people who was actually in the Capitol and had to deal with that. So there's a lot of emotional trauma that follows that experience as well. But in regards to, I think the rest of government, when you see a president elect like Biden, and you see the fact that I think Americans sent a divided Senate and essentially a slim margin in the House, I think Americans are interested in compromise, and I think it's going to be on the Biden team to deliver that and to not, say screw it and fully execute a liberal vision. Because I think if you look at the results down ballot outside of the presidential race, you see that conservatives won, in unexpected numbers in the House. And so I think that tells me for the future of this country, it would make more sense for the incoming administration to want to compromise and not, I guess, enact a super progressive vision. Obviously, I have my own biases with that, but that's what I'm seeing from the situation on the ground.
Javon, can I ask you before Fatu, you continue? How do you feel about the Republican Party, or personally your feelings about the conservative side of the aisle since the election?
I frankly think that we're going to have to go one of two ways as a party. We're either going to have to figure out if, I think our party will fracture. I think you have people who are never going to vote again in a presidential election because the name Trump isn't attached to it. And then I think you've got people who are interested in moving forward. Like myself, obviously I sit on, Gen Z GOP, which is a national organization focused on what's in the title, Gen Z in the GOP and how we can move forward. So a moment like this gives us the opportunity to really bolster our platform. But no, I mean, long story short, the party's in shambles right now, and they're going to have to figure their shit out, and it's going to be, it's not going to be pretty, in my opinion.
I would definitely say that I have shifted more towards the left because just Biden and his moderate agenda, and I'm very skeptical of bipartisanship with white supremacists and people who supported a domestic terrorist attack, as well as the lack of accountability that's happening for those who participated in the events of January 6th. So I don't know. I would say that I'm, to Niall's point, more dissatisfied because I'm like, why are we still trying to appeal and compromise and cooperate with white supremacists? And I guess that's just my thought process about that.
Yeah, and so I never really obviously felt a home in either political party because I'm a registered independent. So my independent status is still very strong. I would say like my politics though, in general though, have very much shifted towards an international lens, and am I no way an expert, but I definitely have tried to internationalize the issues because a lot of the issues that we experience here are exported abroad. So I've been trying to understand on a greater level the parallels between different oppressing factors, that happen to people. So that's my home at the moment.
Yeah, I'm similar to both Alyssa and Now. I've also found myself highly dissatisfied, and I guess you would say more so moving away from the Democratic Party, specifically with this administration. Going back to Javon's point, I'm actually not necessarily looking for compromise with the conservatives in the Senate. Specifically, I think that a lot of the times the excuses have been, why the Democrats couldn't get their legislation through was because, the Republicans have the Senate, or we don't have this and we don't have that. And now finally we are seeing that the Democrats essentially have, all three branches of the government essentially. And we saw a record turnout this year. And even in the Georgia Senate runoff, and a lot of these voters that did come out were promised things that they should get fully because they voted with the expectation that, okay, with these people in these positions that I'm voting them into, the Democrats can now get passed through the legislation and get us the things that they have been promising, whether that be a $15 minimum wage, or whether that be major improvements in immigration policy, or whether that be different things that are in place in terms of holding police officers accountable in terms of police brutality. All of these things should not necessarily be compromised. And I understand that we are a bipartisan country, or so we are made to believe so, but we were pretty much promised these things and there is no need to compromise. And my concern is that the Biden administration will come through with that mindset, we don't want to ram anything through and we want to compromise. And that dissatisfies me tremendously.
Yeah, I can't say that I've moved farther away from the Democratic Party because I wasn't really tied to it to begin with. I feel optimistic only because I feel like now we're out of literally boiling water, out of the house fire. But like everybody's been saying, there's so many concerns, there's so many things that I think that the Democrats will compromise on, just like Fatu was saying, when it comes to minimum wage, so economic stuff, when it comes to funding for police, funding for the military, funding for things that we just honestly do not keep needing to fund. So I'm also concerned about, I can't remember who said it, but I'm also concerned about people getting justice for what happened in the Capitol. People aligning it with the BLM protest is something that I've been seeing a lot, and I think that's very disheartening because I can't see any similarities in what happened at all. And I think something I wanted to bring up later, but I'll bring up now, is that, it's really going to come to Biden to focus on the racial bias in new ways in the police force, because it just literally came full force to the front of everybody's attention on January 6th.
Well, Joey, you mentioned what the events that transpired on January 6th, and Brooks, you also mentioned having a sense of international politics. And so given the events that occurred on January 6th regarding the domestic terrorist attack and invasion of the Capitol by Trump supporters, I'm wondering what, if anything, does this portray about America and our political attitudes, not only at home, but also abroad? And Alyssa, the last time we spoke, you mentioned that the election and failed impeachment of Trump to use signals to other countries that America is contributing to a global wave of fascism. So I'm wondering from the group, what do you think that those events portrayed about America?
I think it just portrayed the truth. I feel like when you travel abroad, or when you know people who are not from America, they have this very idealized sense of America and they don't really know what happens behind the closed doors. But that's the reality. And I was having a conversation with one of my roommates the other day, and he was saying that, for bipartisanship to work, we're going to really have to focus on bringing in the white working class again into the Democratic Party. But I feel very skeptical about that, because I feel like a lot of people have made a stand that we should not ignore. Any alignment, I don't think that you can half align with something. So you either fully align with racism, with fascism, or you don't. And any person who's willing to compromise, any party that's willing to compromise in that direction, which I think is the party that we're dealing with, is really going to have to deal with the consequences of that, which is more civic action on the side of minorities and other people who really care about not turning in that direction.
And yeah, I guess just to respond to a comment that was made earlier, I don't think that America sent a split Senate as well as a split House. I think that there was a surge in Trump supporters because of how just outright he became and how bold he became in his policies and his rhetoric and his beliefs. And I believe that Republicans just benefited down ballot from the massive surge of Trump supporters. I think that the silent minority is real. I think that Trump reinvigorated a voting bloc that has been largely inactive since it was okay to be outwardly racist and explicitly xenophobic and just it's spurring all types of rhetoric. So now that voting bloc has been reinvigorated, and now that in its current political atmosphere, we understand that it is acceptable to have candidates like Trump. We understand that there is a market for candidates like Trump. I believe that this is the first that we'll be seeing of this if there is not accountability at this moment. Everyone who took part in the lies, everyone who supported this man, everyone who participated basically in the events that occurred and how we are divided in this moment, there must be some form of accountability to send a signal on the international stage that our democracy is still semi intact to, you know, to some regard. But I think that's going to be difficult. I think that's going to be really difficult because, like I said, there's a large voting block of people who thought and, you know, supported fascist candidates. So just I think that it's only the beginning, honestly.
Yeah, so I think that the events that occurred on January 6th do have a huge impact sort of over the globe and sort of how other countries around the world, especially when you're talking about those in oppressive regimes where, you know, sort of the opposition parties don't have much voice or much say sort of in what happens in their current politics. I was watching Kenyan TV the other day, and one of the senators in Kenya was sort of talking about how, you know, it almost looks like as if the US has caught up to sort of our form of political violence. And sort of what that signals is that, and I think when we're saying this, we're not saying that the US had a perfect democracy. It never had a true democracy in the truest sense of what a democracy is supposed to be, right? But it had some sort of democracy, a limited democracy, but in some way, shape, or form, it still worked to legitimize the current institutions that it had. And I think that what we saw on January 6th was sort of almost a delegitimization of the current institutions and structures of the American government. And I think when people see that around the world, who do depend on sort of the US's voice to protect them as sort of the oppressive, as sort of the opposition parties in a lot of these different oppressive regimes in the world, that it sends a very bad message. And so you can see the ways in which sort of what happens in the US impacts what happens in other countries. And that's not to say that the US is the great bearer of sort of democracy, what democracy should be like, but because of the economic influence and the military influence that the US has around the world, they do have an impact and they do have a lot of say in what happens in a lot of these countries. And so the destruction of the little democracy that we do have in this country is going to negatively impact other countries who are already struggling with democracy in a much larger way than what we know. And I just want to also answer to sort of the part of have I moved away from sort of the party based off what's happened and what's transpired after the election. I think in a way I haven't necessarily moved away, but I think just like other people, I am disheartened at sort of what has happened, especially on the Senate side. And I think Democrats, unfortunately, they're not able to sort of get their entire Senate caucus to go in line, like in the same way that McConnell was able to do. And so they do have a disadvantage in that you have somebody like Senator Joe mentioned from West Virginia, who was against a $2,000 stimulus check that Biden had proposed a few weeks ago, and then sort of changed his mind and said $1,400 now. And so you're already seeing that sort of the concession of sort of that timidness sort of in the Democratic Party and the inability to sort of get them to do what they must do in order to enact a lot of these legislations that we want. So, you know, Javon, I disagree with you. I don't think that we need more bipartisan necessarily. I think, you know, what are you giving up for the sake of bipartisanship, right? And I think that's what we, as those of us on the left side, have to ask ourselves: what are we giving up for the sake of compromise and for the sake of bipartisanship? And if the things that we're giving up are things that we fought so hard for throughout the election, and that's what got, you know, the 2 senators in Georgia elected, then no, we don't need to compromise. We should fight as hard as we can to get those things through. Till the chickens come home to roost or whatever it may be. And so, no, I don't think bipartisanship is a must. Bipartisanship is okay if you're not sort of compromising on your own values. And so if you're asking the Democrats to compromise on some of their values and some things that they ran on, then no, I don't think they should have to compromise on those things. There are areas that do make sense for compromising and other areas that just don't at all.
I think it's interesting now that you all will have the majority and pretty much have 2 branches of government, frankly, that some of the same rhetoric that we were accused of facilitating, don't compromise, don't talk, screw you guys, figure it out, you should have been elected, is now what you guys are saying. And I find myself in your position where I'm telling you, for the betterment of the country, we should compromise. So I just want to point out that I think rhetoric changes depending on who's in power. But nevertheless, I think it is important, and I will foot stomp this because I do believe it's true. Democrats are supposed to win this election handedly, and they did on the presidential level. In the House races and Senate races, you guys did not do as well as you should have done, frankly. Nancy Pelosi has a 4-seat majority, and the Senate is 50-50. That tells me that while the president is deeply unpopular, candidates can run on a conservative message and win. Everyone who's elected in the House on our side is either a woman, a veteran, or a person of color, or some combination of both, or two or three of those. And so I will sit on the Hill and say that Americans did send a divided government in there, or you guys would have had a huge majority, and you don't. And just as Bobby pointed out, in the Senate, the more conservative members, Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, are going to be the ones that are swing voters half of the time. And so, even though I understand the idea of not compromising and going full steam ahead, I don't think you have the political capital to do so. And so, frankly, I think you all will be a little disappointed when you start seeing compromise take effect. And I think the president elect has shown language and an interest in compromising. And so, if you wanted a candidate who was going to stick it to the Republicans, I'm not sure that's the candidate. That's not. I don't think that's the president we're going to see for the next 4 years. I don't think that's the House that we're going to see in the next 4 years. Nor do I think it's going to see the Senate. And so, I can understand why there's some disappointment. I just want to point out that those important notes.
I'll just, I think that when we're having this conversation about politics, like for me, I think the reality is I just saw some data the other day. It's like from Data for Progress. I like to cite what I say before I say it. And I believe it's from Ethan Wilder. And a really fascinating thing that they found out about Republicans is that Republicans, at least the majority of them, don't necessarily have a good sense of what their party stands for. So for example, if you're looking at the actual votes or where the stated positions of a lot of Republicans in the House and Senate at this time, they're not for that increase of federal minimum wage. The majority of Republicans think that they are. The majority of Republicans think that they're for conserving the pre-existing condition safety nets of Obamacare, and they're not. So what I find really interesting is when we're looking across the aisle is that a lot of the people, or at least the elected majority, have such wildly unpopular opinions that their own constituents don't believe that they would hold them because they're so unpopular, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that really the driving force behind politics is culture war. I think that's what we're kind of seeing between the Republicans and Democrats. I think when you're talking about people, even on my side of the political spectrum, it's much less a conversation about policy and tangible action. It's really about when people describe the president, it's not about, well, I want him to enact X, Y, and Z. It's what he represents and what he's supposed to be symbolically to the world. And I feel like that's ultimately to the detriment of politics. But for me, I fear that the problem that the Republicans face is that, and I guess Javon can disagree on this if this isn't the perspective he has, but I think what ultimately lost them is that they stand against a lot of things, but they don't stand for. So a lot of the things that define the Republicans are they're antithesis to Democrats. So we are I don't want to say we're pro-life, a love for guns, patriotism, or anything that's in a lot of vague ideas that are meant to supplement the cultural war and or things that are just on the opposing side of Democrats. But when you're actually asking what they stand for, what they're going to do in a policy position way, it's either things that are wildly unpopular so much so that their constituents wouldn't actually believe that they do them, or it's really just the nothingness. So I think that when we're talking about the Democrats and the Republicans, I fear that it's not comparable. For example, one thing that Joe Biden just promised is that he is going to put a task force together so that they can reunite the children at the border who were separated to their parents. And that's not something that Republicans ever called for throughout the course of Trump's thing. So it really just feels like there's a saying that my grandma says, it's really just if you ride the tiger, there's a chance that you end the ride inside of it. And I really just feel like that's what Trump was. I think that when you're looking at the political capital that they had, they were you know what, we want 234 judges in lifetime positions on the court. And so to hell with the rest of the party or what happens next or long-term projection, because we can get some immediate returns. And I feel like that's what we're seeing. I think it's less. I think that the Democrats definitely didn't perform as they should have. I don't think that any race between Trump and Biden should have been close or should have been worrying. And the fact that it is kind of speaks to where we are as a country. But I think that it's a lot of the fault lies in Republicans themselves. And I think the fault that where the Democrats fail is that the Republicans have made it so easy for them that for them to fail or for them to not make their promises is vastly unacceptable. But yeah, I guess that was an amalgamation of a couple of things, but I just think the Republican Party is just cannibalizing itself, and it's just the cost of riding the wave that was Trump, and now we're just seeing the aftermath of that, and the aftermath of that is violence and losing the House and losing the Senate.
I think you mentioned a lot of good points, Niall. And if I can, I just want to broaden the conversation a bit and inject a level of, shall we say, intersectionality into the conversation. And Bobby, you mentioned the Georgia election. And so the Georgia runoff election. And I want to just pose to you all, given the results of the Georgia runoff election that was arguably secured by the work of Black women and the grassroots organizations that they run, some people have begun to thank Black women for saving America. And moving forward, they're sort of relying on Black women to continue this political action and organizing support. So I want to know from the group, do you think that this is an unrealistic and unfair responsibility to impose upon Black women?
I was going to let a Black woman talk first about that, but seeing that the room was a little bit quiet, I guess I'd chime in. Well, obviously, of course, it's unfair, and I think it's just it's sort of the reflection of sort of who the bedrock of the Democratic Party has been for a while. It's sort of its most faithful voter bloc, if you will, more so than any other voting bloc. Sort of, I would say, almost to an extent, the history of sort of the two current parties that we have, and sort of the amount of work that Black women have put towards allowing the sort of the Democratic Party to flourish and win elections, from local level all the way to the federal government. I think the issue is that when you say, oh, now these are the people we need to rely on, I think no one should ever say that. I think we should look at how can whether you're talking about Black men or you're talking about white women, whether you're talking about white men, whoever it may be, how can we supplement the work that they've already done, and how can we go in and learn from what they've done, and do the work that we also need to do, whether it's in our, if you're a white working class person, go work in Appalachia and do the work that needs to be done there. Don't expect a Black woman to be the one to come there and sort of and bring those people to vote for the Democrats and whatnot. So I think, if anything, what Black women have done in this election should only tell us that each of us have to play our part, and we need to do what we ought to do to make sure that we're pushing for the sort of politics that we want, we're pushing for the sort of candidates that we want. But it's also about investing in them in terms of how do we get more Black women elected to, political office, investing in sort of Southern politics where the grassroots are happening. How do we truly invest there and believe sort of in the work that's happening there, especially in the grassroots area. So I think just more investment, more acknowledgement, and we need to stop looking at them as sort of the helper, if you will, in that sense. It's sort of that sort of old, somewhat Jim Crow trope of sort of, the Black woman is there helping that your little white baby, help them, grow up and always taking care of sort of the future of this country and whatnot. And so I think we need to look at it. We need to stop looking at it from that landscape and start looking at it from the viewpoint of all of us need to pick up the slack. And this is not the Black woman's job or the Black woman's burden. It's all of our burdens. It's all of our burden, and we need to take the burden off of her. And so I think that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, and I guess to speak to Bobby's point, yeah, I completely agree with all of it. I think it's totally unfair to have that expectation. But I do think that the grassroots activism from Black women across this nation has laid a framework for the Democratic Party that they can adopt. And I think that this election has also revealed that the South is not overwhelmingly conservative and Republican. They're suppressed. The votes are suppressed. So when you get out there, souls to the polls and all of these different initiatives where they were taking, busing folks from church to go to the polls afterwards, and the massive amount of media campaigns just from the millions of dollars that were being poured into these races. Again, I think that when we pull the veil back, we see that for decades, these areas have just simply been suppressed. And I think that one thing Stacey Abrams was brilliant at was taking a polarized stance against the Republican Party. Her message was never, we should compromise or bipartisan. That was never her message. And I think that was why she was so successful. She was like, this is absolutely ridiculous and we need progress. And this is how we can facilitate that progress.
I thought those were great, two great responses. And I just want to know, so as we transition into the Biden-Harris administration, is there anything specifically that any of you, whether you agree with the Biden-Harris administration or whether you wanted to vote for another candidate or in the presidential election or from the primaries, is there anything that you're paying attention to or hoping to see or not see regarding specific policy or political appointments?
Yeah, off the jump, and this is just like bare minimum, like literal, like day one stuff for the Biden administration. is, first and foremost, retroactive $2,000 checks per month, starting when the pandemic started to when the pandemic ends for all adults, canceling student debt, but also putting a moratorium, extending the moratorium on rent and mortgage payments for homeowners and for renters. And this is a little more out there, but you also need to empty the prisons. You also need to empty nonviolent offender. This is a whole nother topic, but politically empty out the nonviolent offenders. That's also a reason that this pandemic has been going on and has only gotten worse exponentially since the last time we just talked. So those are just a few things. Day one, executive order, we've seen the precedent set, not just by Trump, but by Obama too, that you can get things done with the stroke of a pen. You don't need the other branches of the government. Live with the results afterwards. And these policies, if they were enacted on day one, are going to help the average American. It's going to help the oppressed American. And that's what we need right now.
I would just say I would caution, I would hope the president-elect decides to go through the legislature. I would also, remember that, conservatives or originalist judges do, more of them sit on the Supreme Court. And so I think you're going to see a lot of lawsuits get there if President-elect Biden does decide to expand executive power, where it's already, and personally, I think at a dangerous level, no matter who's in the office. I would like to see Congress do their damn job and actually start legislating and not just rescinding all their rules to the executive branch. I said under the outgoing president. I think the same is true under President Obama. And I would hope to see an increased activity from the legislative branch. That would be my hope.
I think like my shortest request is just them doing everything they said they would do the first day. I think those are ultimately like the least controversial, most immediate things. Like I do think that we do need that moratorium on home evictions. I do think we need to pause student loan payments. I think we need to push that 1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package. I think we need to issue mask mandates. I think there's a lot of things, it's really fascinating because oftentimes I think in a lot of political situations, I like to play long term. So there are policies that you have to see to play out over decades as to whether or not they're having a positive societal effect. So when we're talking about reconfiguring the criminal justice system and reforming that area, that's not something that you're going to see immediate turnover for, but it's a long-term investment. I think that Trump has left us in such a precarious situation that my most immediate requests are really just a mask mandate and the Muslim ban. Half of what I want him to do is just to undo things, which is really fascinating. I think one of the most spiteful things that the Trump administration did was they're even though they don't have the power to do it, is that they're oh, January 26th, we're removing all of our travel restrictions regardless of COVID. So now you can go anywhere. And then Biden's incoming press secretary had to be no, we're keeping those restrictions up and we're going to enforce them further so that we can get COVID under wrap. So I think that I feel like Biden could just take a shit on the front lawn and I would just be look at this president. Look at how presidential he is. I think of course, when we're talking long-term and stuff, there are actual things that he needs to do. And I'm not really interested in moderation in certain areas. There are things that absolutely need to have political and social turnover in policy. But I think what's really interesting because of just the situation we're in, a lot of my political interests are very immediate because it's I don't know how we get the criminal justice reform or enfranchising voters and all these other really important issues if 400,000 Americans are dying a day because of COVID. So I really think we need to bottleneck a lot of these national emergencies so we can actually get to the real work of legislating on all the other issues that bring people to the table.
Yeah, I think as it relates to policy, I would like to see a federal jobs program based around clean energy. I think that a lot of disenchantment with the white working class voters is deindustrialization. All of the jobs were shipped away. We're dealing with the consequences of a Reagan administration, of a Nixon administration, and these policies, these awful policies that essentially sent all of these jobs overseas. So I think that people need to be trained for the new job market. I think that we are going to go through a second wave of deindustrialization, but this time it will not be the factory workers or the coal miners, it will be the truck drivers, it will be the McDonald's workers. And as we get self-driving cars and kiosks at fast food restaurants. So I think that it is imperative that we retrain and teach people, especially jobs related to developing clean energy, and provide people with those skills to have some semblance of whatever we consider to be the American dream.
Although I don't think it'll happen, I would like to see an increased focus on housing. I mean, after everything that we've been through in the last year and a half, people losing their homes, being evicted, not having the moratorium, losing their jobs, and with the rise in gentrification just overall happening, I really would like to see some support in that area, even though I don't really have a direct pinpoint on what it would be. But I can't see Biden focusing on that in the immediate future, unfortunately.
Just echoing with everybody else pretty much said, Niall's emphasis on a lot of like the immediate relief that people need during this time of COVID. Specifically, I'm thinking about, I think Brooks mentioned it, people that are incarcerated. I think I'm really looking to see criminal justice reform, specifically with given Kamala Harris's history with the prison industrial complex and her history in incarcerating, parents, family members for like weed convictions and stuff like that. But also the abolition of the death penalty, that is something that has grown tremendously on me. And just knowing that like historically it has been racist, and that it just is an inhumane thing to uphold. And we have been seeing recently within these past months, many cases of people that have been on death row, some of whom have already been killed, some of whom who are waiting to be killed, and then just revisiting the facts of their case and seeing that it's not so simply black and white. So definitely looking towards the abolition of the death penalty, but criminal justice reform, especially in general.
Well, thank all of y'all for sharing your thoughts. I mean, 2020, as we all know, was a year like no other, but especially the summer of 2020 when we saw the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so given that context and moving forward, tomorrow we are going to have the first Black woman and South Asian woman as our vice president. But I want to know from you all, how do you hope, and I want to finish with this. So if you can give me some words of wisdom, some words of hope, just enlighten all of us, because obviously we all come from the diaspora, from the Black community, and our audience is predominantly Black. We do this for Black viewers and Black audiences. So how do you hope activism will advance on behalf of Black Americans beyond a superficial and performative means in the Biden-Harris administration?
I would just say, I think, or I don't think, the exit polls from the recent election saw that the president doubled the percentages in Black votes, specifically Black men vote. The percentage that he got in 2016, we saw the same with Latinos, and we saw the same with LGBTQ plus Americans. One of the things I'm looking for on the activism side, at least on the conservative side, is that for those individuals who felt compelled to vote, I guess, in a non-traditional way, I hope that they are part of the conversation that needs to take place when it comes to rebuilding our party. Frankly, we can't survive as a majority white, majority straight, cisgender. I mean, we have to diversify, and not for identity politics, not to say that we've got a Black person or we've got a woman of color, but because it's the right thing to do. So that's what I'm looking forward to, the rebuilding effort that I think is going to have to take place, some really difficult conversations that are going to have to take place. Yeah, that's what I'm excited for the next 4 years.
The things that I'm looking for are just actually backing with money and with policy change. Seeing a disinvestment in organizations that obviously uphold systems of white supremacy and of anti-Blackness. Seeing policy seeing an action behind like their words. So I don't want to just hear people in Congress say all this stuff about diversity, but like actually seeing them or putting on the Kente cloths or whatever it is that they're going to do, but actually seeing that effect in the lives of the people that are in the streets, that are actually asking for it. And I think until you get that, change isn't really real.
I think that I'm optimistic about the potential of widespread structural change, only because the circumstances by which we're living in at this moment, we're battling concurrent crises in this country. So I think that the conditions that we're now experiencing are only really analogous to like the Great Depression, where we did see a massive expansion of the social safety net in different type of governmental institutions that arose to help protect Americans. So I would say I'm most optimistic about the potential for wide and structural change, if it happens, that is.
Yeah, I'm looking for. I'm not looking top down. Real change starts from the grassroots up. As Alyssa, wisely pointed out. After the New Deal, the social safety net rose, but that was only due to grassroots organizations, communist organizations, socialist organizations. And so the political spectrum, it was either forced, they were coerced into joining the liberals, and the Liberal Democratic Party was forced to take some of their ideas so they didn't lose again. So the country didn't erupt. So we're kind of past the eruption point, but optimistically, just mutual aid, working within our communities, protecting one another, just trying to grow communal power locally and start small with your immediate communities, is what I would say. And I'm talking to myself as well too. We all got a lot of work to do, because we're not out of the woods just yet.
I think if there's one thing that a Biden administration does, I just think that it ensures that there's a level of ability and space to create a lot of fundamental and radical change for the betterment of a lot of different populations of Americans that just wouldn't be possible under a Trump administration, let alone for another 4 years. So I'm just hoping that a lot of community organizers, a lot of activists, a lot of people in local governments, like the people who aren't just in Washington, but everyone from underneath that, is taking this opportunity of time and space and resource to make these fundamental changes, so that moving forward, it's not just like a back and forth between incredibly like terrible times and kind of okay, I guess, if you're not looking at international policy or anything else times. I just think that we can kind of move out of the paradigm that we have politically. And I just hope that we are in the position to take advantage of that. And I hope that everyone does.
In connection to what Now's saying, but looking at it specifically from those in Washington, I think, and we spoke about this last meeting that we had, about kind of like the idea of a lot of these politicians as celebrity. And I'm just thinking of a lot of these very popular people, specifically the Democratic Party, the AOCs, the Squad, and how a lot of them do tend to align and kind of like attempt to uplift the voice of a lot of these grassroots organizers. I guess what I'm hoping for is kind of like more genuineness within that. I feel like a lot of what we are seeing now is artificial and kind of like watered down. And you just see that in general with like liberals and kind of like trying to say like, well, this is what we mean by defund the police. It doesn't mean this. And then what they're listing is entirely antithetical to what the actual Black Lives Matter activists are actually saying that they want. So I'm really hoping that they are genuinely hearing and not just saying like, we hear you, and kind of giving a filtered and watered down and more like acceptable kind of like paraphrasing of what it is that they're demanding, but honestly listening, genuinely supporting, and actually enforcing, like putting forth the legislation that a lot of these marginalized communities are asking for.
Yeah, I think sort of on an end note is that I do think it's definitely gonna be a different page than the sort of the chapter we've been in the past 4 years. So I think that there is some hope with that. And just like Nai will sort of say that, we are probably going to be in an environment where we're going to be able to at least vie for sort of some of the legislations and sort of progressive sort of efforts that we want to be enacted, and we'll have a little bit of a much easier time. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, or that the current democratic structure is going to accept sort of those efforts right away. And so I think that because we know that we have that space and sort of that opening with this new administration, it's really time for us to sort of put that pressure on them. And I think that going forward, we should just, we shouldn't stop. We shouldn't stop criticizing them. We shouldn't stop asking for more. We shouldn't stop asking for what we think that we deserve, no matter their circumstance. And so I think we just got to keep fighting. And I think that this is one of our best time to do it. I think Barack Obama was sort of this test run, which in some way it failed, in some way it succeeded, but it's kind of gray. There's a lot of things that went on there. And I think that we have to learn from that time period and understand that where we are now, it is that opportunity for us to fight for those things that we want. But it's also time for us to have conversations with, those Black men who felt strongly enough that they should vote for Trump after all the things that he's done and said about, our community, the things that he's said about majority Black countries around the world and he's done towards them, on the part of the immigration that has impacted a lot of our Black communities who come from other parts of the world. I think seeing that and seeing as how there was still members of our communities that felt more emboldened to actually vote for him, that, it says that there's some work that we ought to do within our community, but it also says that we have to fight a lot harder and we have to pressure the current Democratic Party even more. And it's just as important to do so with this Biden administration. And I do hope that we're going to get something out of it and, just keep fighting for it.
Amen. Well, I think that's a good place to end it. In the shadow of MLK Day, which was yesterday, we obviously have a lot of work to do, but I honestly, I'm optimistic that the work will get done. And it's up to all of us, not just the politicians, all of us to get it done. And I believe that we will. So thank y'all so much for joining me. Stay great, stay blessed, and stay Black.